Hello and welcome to Community Care's Mental Health Response Training. This is Module 6, Proactive Approaches for Well-Known Consumers. My name is Paul Horn and I'll be your instructor once again. And if you're joining us for the first time or returning, either way we'd like to say thank you for participating in this course. In this module, the questions we will answer include: what circumstances cause the repeat consumer? And what are the myths behind repeat consumers, also known as frequent flyers? What, if anything, can be done to address this cyclic consumer? What are second and third stage facilities or programs, and how do they work? And we'll also discuss outreach. And how can we stay connected to consumers and avoid this cycle? So, one of the first things that's a bit of a struggle as we put this course together is deciding exactly how we're going to name or label this particular phenomenon of the repeat consumer. So just to be clear, we're talking about the individual who comes through the system on a repeat basis but seems to be making little progress. And these contacts with the system seem to arise, generally speaking, out of crisis. And the crisis could be in the form of a mental health decompensation, particularly something that's urgent or emergent and affects their own personal health. It could be that there is a relapse related to an addiction or an overdose, and it could be a combination of something that's a substance use issue as well as a mental health issue. Now, we struggled to think of the term we would use because there appears to be no specific paradigm on this term at this point. We used the term frequent flyer even though it's probably not the most dignified or client-centered term, but we used it because it seems to be the most commonly understood term at this point. Certainly, we're hoping people will use a more respectful term, and we will try to do that throughout the program as much as possible. So we're going to use the words cyclic user or cyclic consumer or repeat consumer. And we're hoping that there will be an evolution towards a more clear paradigm here, and more importantly, that there will be an evolution towards addressing this phenomenon. And we begin the module by watching a very brief video that was put together by Henry Ford Hospital, and it's, I think, a fairly self-explanatory video.
We have a program here at Henry Ford to help manage the frequently presenting patients. And as part of one of the people who are on this committee, we see that these patients can elicit a lot of negative reactions from our own physicians. So the purpose of our survey was to see if other physicians in other ERs across the country have the same reaction towards frequent patients. The findings of our study were that 97% of emergency physicians across the country are seeing frequently presenting patients. And 91% of these physicians stated that frequent patients are a problem for an ED. We didn't want the study to be physicians don't have empathy for their patients, but in fact all of our comments that we got back, physicians really understand what's going on, and it's difficult because an emergency room physician shouldn't be the person who cures homelessness. The emergency room physician shouldn't be the one that strategizes about transportation for patients. The emergency room is not the place where cost of medications should be figured out. And so the emergency room physicians are feeling burnout because they're having to deal with all of these social issues. So the empathy issue, it's not that our physicians lack empathy, but what I would say is our physicians have empathy, but they really don't have a chance to help the patients the way they want. I think the take-home message for hospitals, and especially for emergency room administration, is that emergency room physicians are in the trenches dealing with these frequent patients. They need assistance to do this. 70% of our physicians stated they want a program to help them help this group of patients.
While the video is based on the experiences of American physicians in an American hospital, I strongly suspect that few of us would argue that here in Canada we have a very different experience. It's obvious to me that our experience is relevant and comparable, and even those of us who don't work directly in the healthcare system have become aware of this phenomenon of the cyclic user and how it is both frustrating for that consumer and for the professionals, the community, and their family in terms of dealing with the system in a way that is costly, both in terms of time and finances, and very, very ineffective. Now, an interesting observation is made in the video. The suggestion is made that doctors, especially emergency room doctors, are not responsible for addressing the issue of homelessness. In this course, in this particular module, we're going to ask people to consider whether or not that's a valid statement, whether or not we have a professional and or a moral responsibility to play a role in improving this phenomenon. And we want you to think about this as realists. We want you to think about it from the perspective not only of what's better for the consumer, but for us as members of a community and for our community as a whole, and even, frankly speaking, in terms of what's better for us in terms of money and in terms of use of our time and resources. In a nutshell, we're going to take the perspective that it isn't the role of any single individual to address the issue of homelessness or of cyclic consumers. In fact, it's the role of a community as a whole, and that we need to think beyond what our physical and social infrastructure is going to do for us in a formal way and commit informally, morally, as community members and neighbors to do what we can collaboratively to move forward with people who need our help. In doing so, we're likely to be more satisfied at the end of the day in our jobs and accomplish the very things that we set out to do when we began our study and our training. And at the end of the day, we're also likely to experience less frustration, less waste, and better results. What we'd like you to do is do a journal exercise that gets you thinking at this point about why, in your experience or opinion, some people seem to go through the mental health system in this cyclic fashion. And ask yourself, what impact does this have on that person? And what impact does it have on their family, on the community as a whole, and professionals who work with them?